Minister Catherine Martin, TD, Minister for Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sport and Media. You're very, very welcome, Minister. I always feel like I need to take a breath when I'm describing your brief, your title. It takes some time to even say it. So what is it even like trying to manage a portfolio of that? I know every time I talk to you, I ask you this question, but how do you manage a portfolio with so many entities and demands within it?
Good morning, Derval. Delighted to join you today. I guess it is a big portfolio, but the key is it all makes sense, actually, and it's very much connected. And I think that's going to be the key that I've identified to be effective. The job is obviously very, very challenging. There's no doubt about that. And everything from, tourism to arts to sport to the Gaeltacht. It's very much reliant on people gathering, and all are devastated. But very much, I suppose, those under my remit are the worst affected and the first shut, and will be the last to reopen. But it's my job to work and just listen to the previous contributions. It's the engagement with the stakeholders that they are part of the solution, and I absolutely identify that. I guess as a person, as Catherine Martin, I'm someone who works well in challenging circumstances, and that'd be part of who I am. I'm a very determined sort of person, tenacious and persistent, and I'm a fighter, and I think that's what given today, and those who are listening and who are under severe personal and financial circumstances and severity of the devastation that is COVID. I'm fighting for you, and I think I'll do what I can, but I absolutely get that engagement. And my very first day here, Derval, when I walked into this office, I asked for a meeting with the Tourism Recovery Task Force, and that was my first engagement as a minister, and I wanted to signal. And I hope everyone that's listening today realises how much I know you need the support to not just survive, but to recover on the far side. And I'm determined to do that.
And of course, there is a big synergy, because it's not just the 160,000 job losses, the 20,000 companies that we've heard, but also that multiplier effect for what I suppose we've worked very hard on the last couple of years, the experience economy, which does include your culture, it does include everything else, and obviously all those ancillary jobs. I'm thinking of, companies that are making, duvets and covers and just supplying all of those industries. The scale is quite big. We were just talking about, the different headlines in Ireland and the UK this morning. They're quite different, but last night your colleague Leah Varadkar, the Tánaiste, just seemed to put to bed any notion that we would have an international tourism recovery, certainly in the first half of this year, that if there's going to be anything, it's going to be domestic only. And I know obviously tourism falls within a lot of different briefs in terms of its impacts, but what is your own thinking this morning, Minister, on recovery in the tourism sector?
I'd be reasonably optimistic about recovery in I suppose, in the domestic economy. Having said that, I'm acutely aware that 75% of the tourism economy is the international tourist. I think our focus now is on suppressing the virus and making sure that domestic tourism is as best as it can be in the summer. I think what's different, if you think of where we were as a nation this time last year, people were planning holidays abroad. That is not the case. So I would hope to see a stronger domestic tourism and those staycations really increase this year. But again, as I said, it's 180,000 jobs are vulnerable or at risk, and that international tourism economy is 75%. But we are working on it, and we will be ready to go. The key is there'll be no cliff edge, and I've worked with Minister Donoghue and with the Taoiseach on this, and there'll be no cliff edge for this industry. And it's about putting the right supports in place to survive, making the most of the domestic economy, but of course it's no replacement for the international tourist.
We're obviously in the process of, Minister, producing legislation that will encompass mandatory quarantine. The Taoiseach talked about, difficulties with that from a constitutional law perspective, from freedom of movement, not least complicated by, and we're both border girls, but not least complicated by the common travel area. Are you disappointed at reports, Minister, that 60% of people who are coming into Dublin Airport are in fact Irish holiday makers who have gone on holiday, that there are still significant numbers of people who are not following the advice that the vast majority of the population are adhering to?
Well, of course, because you'd hope for solidarity, and so when a nation and so many businesses are suffering and people are going through that financial and personal hardship. But you have to have optimism too. But then there's the job of government to it, and our primary objective has to be to minimise the introduction of new cases to the state from other locations. And with regard to inbound tourism, that is quite difficult right now. But there'll be stronger measures put in place. I think that's the way the government is moving right now, Derval. And for this industry and for all those who are listening now, we will be ready to go and promote Ireland as soon as the time is right, and that's where our focus is on. And I know Tourism Ireland, I've made sure they're adequately resourced, and they're working on that too.
There is no lack of recommendations in the ITIC report that you will have received, but I suppose if there's two major issues that they've highlighted, one is the urgent rollout of the vaccine and the other is the restoration of international connectivity. And obviously that is huge. It does encompass other ministers, of course, but on those two issues, what do you think can be done there that we could get some class of a meaningful summer, even if it is only for the domestic market? So your just thoughts on, do you think we should have the antigen testing? Should we be in? Do you support, for example, the stronger measures looking at mandatory quarantine for certain passengers?
There's a couple of questions there in relation to the vaccination. What I can say is, we're 50 days into the vaccination rollout. We have just over 230,000 doses administered. It would be the hope by the end of March we would be nearing 600,000. It would be hope by the end of April and May we'll be at maybe the 1 million mark, which is is 1/3 of who we intend to vaccinate. And the Taoiseach himself has said that towards that mid-year it will certainly be a different space. I think a different landscape altogether. We could be looking at Johnson & Johnson, that authorisation, maybe by the end of February. So all of this gives us hope in relation to the vaccination. In relation to connectivity, the government remains absolutely committed to ensuring that the aviation sector can maintain the necessary core capability to retain that strategic connectivity and is ready to quickly rebound when the time is right to do so. As I said, I have ensured that Tourism Ireland, and they're doing great work, is adequately resourced to go back into the marketplace. There'll be strong competition, but we should not forget who we are as a nation and how attractive we are to the US and to other countries, and that hasn't gone away. And there's pent up willingness abroad to come back to Ireland for family, never mind for those who want to holiday, and that remains there. So our job is to make sure we're ready when that happens, and we're working on that.
And Minister, there's a lot of debate and depend on which side of the zero COVID spectrum you are. A lot of people will say that there's been a closed sign over Ireland. Others will kind of say that we didn't shut down early enough in terms of our airports. Looking back now and looking to what other jurisdictions, South Korea, New Zealand, etc., is there anything when you look back at this part of the crisis that we could have done differently? particularly given the measures the UK government is now taking in terms of quarantines and hotels and restricting access to its airspace?
Well, we are moving in that direction now. Hindsight is a great thing, but I think we have to look forward now and do what is best. We are very concerned about the high incidence of the virus in many countries and regions, and the potential. It's such an uncertain thing, COVID. I often say a week is a long time in politics, but it's a very long time with COVID as well. So it's just, I think it's essential we restrict travel into the country to a minimum. We've effectively banned travel from South Africa and Brazil, and including suspending any visa-free travel from those countries. And you also have, the mandatory quarantine at hotel for 14 days for those who arrive from the country. I think the PCR test is the most reliable of the tests, and that's what we're using. So, it's uncertain times, but we're doing our best because the main emphasis is on suppressing the virus so that we have the hope of recovering.
And is there a concern that there may be a little bit of forum shopping, as it were, going on, people using Dublin as a hub to get into the UK? Are you concerned at reports that perhaps people are using us as a gateway to get into the UK, or are you happy that the government has a handle on that?
Well, I think the Taoiseach indicated yesterday, we were looking at the developments in the UK. So, the two island strategy may be something that needs to be explored. We have to explore all options, Derval, to protect us and also with those who are watching today to protect this industry to make sure it has the potential, it's rightly placed to recover.
Yeah. Can I speak to you, Minister, about the last budget? And I know that Eoghan and the TRT got into you in time before that budget was delivered. And I suppose there's the key issues. There are the supports. And earlier today, Ruth Andrews did acknowledge the extensive supports. But there were two risks. If, we can acknowledge perhaps that the last budget, to the extent that it could be, given all the demands, was pro-tourism. One of the big sticking issues is VAT. And when you speak to particularly hoteliers at the minute who are negotiating pricing for 2022, 2023, they are saying they need a 2 to 3 year and possibly a further lead-in. You're the minister who's championing tourism. Are you in speaking to Paschal Donoghue, to the Taoiseach, saying, I know it's not my brief, but I need 3 to 5 years for this? Are you fighting on the VAT front?
Well, that is the budgetary negotiation process, and the reduction from the 13.5% to 9% that we achieved in the last budget. It is the most targeted and most focused and of most benefit to this sector. What I can say is I'm very aware of that, and my focus is on that. So that would be my message here. And I have that very good working relationship, as I've said, with Minister Donoghue and with the Taoiseach too.
But do you accept, I suppose, that tension in the industry that their multi-year planning, they have to look ahead, they're looking for that kind of certainty, and I suppose maybe just that vulnerability around every year the budget coming in, that because even with the best of intentions, if we don't have an international market this year, the VAT rate mightn't be of benefit in this fiscal year, but it may actually be to next year and to 2023 and further on to recovery, that will really be when it's required.
Yeah, I absolutely understand the call for this, and as I said, that is where my focus is, because I see the absolute benefit it is. It's a targeted benefit for this industry. I'm working on the other supports too. Only last week, the 55 million for Fáilte Ireland. I think the COVID restriction support scheme as well, overseen by Minister Donoghue, that I linked in with him on that. And actually, tourism and hospitality sector account for 2/3 of the payments of that, which is up to 155 million euro. So I think it's all the horizontal supports. As I said, my focus is on the VAT, but it's all the supports that this industry needs, and key to that is me listening and engaging and hearing the calls, and that's what that's what I did from day one in this ministry, and I will continue to do so. That the tourism oversight group that I set up on foot of the report and recommendations is due to have its third meeting and present its report shortly to me. And as I said at the time, when the Recovery Task Force are meeting, Derval, I made the recommendation to them to get it to me before the budget. That's what helps me as your minister. And this report will be very helpful too in informing me and helping me to fight for this industry.
And what is the manoeuvre? I have this vision of you surrounded by gatekeepers from all the different sectors, culture, media, everything coming at you, because everybody wants sector-specific supports that they're crying out for. And I'm just wondering, what is the capacity for that when a lot of the measures that have been introduced in Ireland and elsewhere have been crude but effective measures? You wouldn't introduce them in ordinary times. Let's just maybe put it that way. So that is that a very difficult thing to I suppose withstand, that constant demand for sector specific, and are you sympathetic though to them?
It's not difficult for me to withstand it because that's my job. Where I find it difficult is the heartbreaking stories of all of those in my sector. But that makes me, I suppose, even more determined to help them. And as I said, I think one of the advantages of my broad remit is how they can work together and the joined up thinking, and where the artistic can help the touristic or the culture and sport, how they can all work together, how they can promote rural Ireland and regional tourism as well. And I see that connection. So supports I'm putting in place for tourism may help the arts, supports I'm putting in place for arts may help the tourism, and I have to constantly think like that as well. But I wouldn't look for any sympathy as the minister. It's my job, and I to work hard for those who are feeling, as I said, the personal and financial hardship. So my thoughts and my focus is on helping those, and I'm resilient. And as I said, I am a fighter. And I'm doing my best to make sure it's not just about survival, but it's about I've seen to the far side. I'm looking to the year of the gathering, for example, and thinking, let's be ambitious. I'm being optimistic. What can we make out of that? And how can the arts and the sports connects to the bed nights, for example. So I'm forward looking. So obviously in the moment, the supports, but you have to have that optimism and see beyond where we are now.
Do you see that role of maintaining connectivity, international routes? Because after all of this, there is going to be fierce competition for those routes, for those slots. Is that a priority for you in terms of connectivity? I know it obviously crosses with the Transport Minister, but that is going to be key for our recovery into the future, maintaining that connectivity. And I noted your colleague, the Housing Minister, Darragh O'Brien, on Monday, saying that it will be quite some time before that international connectivity opens up. But from your point of view, that must be critical. Is that something that you're working closely with Eamon Ryan on, that fight to get those slots in the future?
Yes, Derval, I am absolutely to maintain that connectivity, and the government is determined to do that. And obviously, it helps that myself and Eamon are party colleagues as well, and we're only chatting about this yesterday. But Tourism Ireland has actually done research on this and indicates that tourists do want to return to Ireland. The research has been done when the time is right, and we have to be sure that we're ready to capitalise on that when it comes. So, I think research from Tourism Ireland even shows that people are ready to come to us by the end of this year. So I wouldn't, we don't have to rule out 2021 yet if that's what the research has shown. And there's an appeal actually of a mix of the city and the rural from those who want to come back to us. I suppose it's really about the vaccines. It's the key part in this is the vaccine rollout. But the same Tourism Ireland research shows that key target countries like France and the UK and Germany found among those who plan to take the vaccine, around half of them said that they'd resume travel, which is, as soon as they're vaccinated. So there's the hope again, if that's what the research is shown. But obviously it will be the domestic tourism that will recover first. And in relation to domestic tourism, I would say one thing of note, I think for everyone in this industry is the change, or what we're noticing about savings. And Central Bank of Ireland have reported an increase in 13 billion in household savings. And I think there's a pent-up demand there, and when those
some would argue that they
translate into tourism businesses, that's where we'll see the growth.
Can I ask you, Minister, and some would say perhaps that level of record household savings might actually prove a little bit of a risk. Some are afraid of what might happen when that pent-up demand comes out. But there was a question I wanted to ask you about just, and I know we've only a couple of minutes left with you, but listening to that interview with Willie Walsh and Full just before he heads off to Geneva and to Atta was fascinating. He talks about the risks, real risks of consolidation in the aviation sector, and there's going to be a lot of winners and losers. People will be happy to hear that he predicts that Ryanair and Aer Lingus will survive and thrive, but he doesn't have that same outlook for many other airlines, and he does raise that issue about the need to be competitive on connectivity. But you'll have just heard on the last piece of his interview, we obviously just gave you some excerpts. One of his key concerns is sustainability. And perhaps in the midst of this crisis, we haven't really been thinking about that because it's just been about surviving and trying to see beyond the next quarter, the next half year, and just, getting those supports to people. But sustainability in Irish tourism is going to be something that would be really important, not least because consumers are going to demand that.
Absolutely, and with my green hat on, and that obviously is something I negotiate in Intergovernment, for example, the sustainable tourism policy and the longer stays initiative, and the tourism recovery. One of the recommendations, the plan recommends that schemes which promotes sustainable tourism, both at enterprise level and at consumer level, should be identified for the recovery. So I as Minister, see the amazing potential in this, just as he does, to promote green destinations, to promote, it's what we can do well, it's our brand, it's what's unique to us. The longer stays, the eco and the agri-tourism, the link to accommodation destinations, to local agri-food and tourism attractions, our beautiful greenways, our walkways. And in the programme for government, we're looking at developing a lovely, from Cardenford Lough to Cove. There's so much potential there. And I think there's a paradigm shift in thinking in what the demand will be actually for this.
Will that include, Minister,
I think it makes
assets?
sense. And we...
Could that include state assets that perhaps are underutilised, perhaps, parks, forest, other areas that perhaps could be utilised even for the domestic market? I know that's more of a longer term play, but in terms of sustainable tourism, are there other assets, underused assets that we're not exploiting enough?
Well, I think we have to explore everything because we see it everywhere, and I think, as you said, even in domestic tourism, we don't explore it enough. And that's what we saw in the promotion of staycations last year. That so many people's eyes were open to what it was. Myself, I holidayed along, with the family, with Sligo down to Clare, along the Burren, taking walks along the cliffs of Moher, and then down to Dingle. There's such beauty there. We have the greatest beauty and attractions that do attract tourists from all over the world, which brings sustainable benefits actually to our rural communities who need that benefit in offering that greener Ireland. So the wild Atlantic way, but as you say, there's others that need to explore, and everything should be explored. I think this is the new way. I often have that phrase: the recovery can be green, and I think this has a real part to play in the recovery of tourism. And the first thing is that sustainable tourism policy to get that in place.
And finally, Minister, can I just ask you about, because a lot of people who will be tuning in will be wondering not just about will their businesses survive and thrive, but even if they do, there is a real fear over the loss of that talent. There is a fear that young people, perhaps their parents, if they're choosing their next steps for college or university or their next step after school, they mightn't find tourism and hospitality the attraction it once was. What is kind of that message to those because it is the biggest Indigenous sector that we have, but there may be a lot of people who might be afraid to stay in it, or indeed to encourage younger people into a really, really important sector for the economy?
Yeah, well, I've heard that message loudly and clearly, and only in recent days I was talking to my cabinet colleagues in government about that and how the retention is key, and that experience is built up. But that's where we'll look at. You'll see in the coming weeks new training programs in upskilling and holding on, the digitalisation, for example, of the tourism industry, so that we're ready to go. So that's where you'll see the effort going already. I allocated 5 million in the budget into that, and that's been rolled out already. But retention is key for this industry, and I know there's a risk there, and the concerns are there. But I'm working on that too, and I've raised that with my cabinet colleagues.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that everyone listening will be grateful to hear that you're fighting for that, and I know they'll be harassing you interminably about the VAT rate, but sure, you know that already. So look, Minister, I'm going to let you go there. Thank you for joining us. I know you have a very, very busy schedule, but thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Slán,
all the best. Thank you. So look, we are going to